Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to lead off with Jack Bruce, who died recently at the age of 71. Jack Bruce was one of the three members of the great 1960 supergroup Cream. He was one of the top bass players in Great Britain in the 1960s. He had played with John Mayall's blues band and a little bit with Manfred Mann. And in 1966 he teamed up with Ginger Baker, who was one of the leading drummers in Great Britain, and Eric Clapton, who was already a guitar legend by that time, and they formed a group that they named after the cream of the crop. They called it Cream. Everybody else knew it as the first supergroup, the first teaming of all-star musicians together. And although they only lasted together for 2 years, 1967 and 1968, they sold 35 million records, and they made some really great music. They broke up because, well, they couldn't get along together that well, especially Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker. I remember the first time I ever heard Cream in 1968. I was away at camp, and one of my counselors brought in a couple of their albums, and it was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Besides playing bass, Jack Bruce also did most of the vocals for the group. He did a lot of the writing too. Here's their biggest hit, Sunshine of Your Love, and he's on the vocals on this and the next couple of songs I'm going to play from Cream. That bump, 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 bump guitar riff that's so famous is his riff.
It's getting near dawn, when lights grows a tired eye, I'll soon be with you, my love. Give you my dawn surprise. I've been waiting so long to be where I'm going, in the sunshine of your love.
Here he does a real nice vocal job on White Room.
In a white room with black curtains near the station, black roof country, no gold pavements, tired starlings, silver horses, ran down movies in your dark eyes.
Here he is on I Feel Free. One of the things Eric Clapton said about him is he was great with syncing his voice to the rhythm of the song.
Feel when I dance with you, we would like to see you. You're all I want to know. I feel free. I feel free.
In this next one, the lyrics aren't much, but the music is absolutely great. It shows off the wide range of Cream's talents. Ginger Baker's drumming, Eric Clapton's guitar, and Jack Bruce's voice. He's so glad.
I'm so glad, I'm so glad, I'm glad, I'm glad, I'm glad. I'm so glad, I'm so glad, I'm glad, I'm glad, I'm glad. Don't know what to do, don't know what to do, don't know what to do.
And my rock and roll friend Bill advised me to close with this one because he thinks it's his best, and I think he's right. It's Tales of Brave Ulysses. Jack Bruce didn't write this one, Eric Clapton did. Clapton drew a lot of his influence on this one from John Sebastian and the Lovin' Spoonful, and it's got one of the first wah-wah guitars. It's just a great song, Tales of Brave Ulysses, sung by Jack Bruce.
You thought the leaden winter would bring you down forever, but you rode upon a steamer to the violence of the sun. And the colors of the sea find your eyes with trembling mermaids, and you touch the distant beaches with tales of brave Ulysses, how his naked ears were tortured by the sirens sweetly singing, for the sparkling waves are calling you to kiss the white lace lips.
Jack Bruce, he lived a hard life, but in 1993, Cream made it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he reunited for a couple of songs with Ginger Baker and Eric Clapton at the ceremony. In both the rock and the blues community, he has universal respect as a writer, vocalist, and bassist. I'm going to move on now to our feature tonight. Our feature is Frank Mankiewicz, who died recently at the age of 90, and he's a neat guy. He didn't get as much publicity as he should have. He comes from one of the most impressive families in the United States. His father was Herman Mankiewicz, who was the main screenwriter for Citizen Kane. He didn't get all the credit. Orson Welles stole a lot of the credit from him. and maybe the most brilliant screenwriter in Hollywood history. He also wrote Pride of the Yankees and for the Marx Brothers as well. His uncle was Joseph Mankiewicz, who directed All About Eve and Cleopatra. One of his sons is Ben Mankiewicz, who does a really great job on Turner Classic Movies as one of the hosts. And Frank Mankiewicz was quite an impressive guy in his own right. He was the president of National Public Radio for a while. He ran the campaign of George McGovern, and he helped with the campaign of Gary Hart. He was a great writer. He was friends with William Safire, and he often filled in for William Safire on the language Maven column. He knew a lot about language, and in fact, he invented the term retronym, which is that term for things that have a name today that didn't need a name years ago, like acoustic guitar and digital clock. But Frank Mankiewicz is best known as the close friend and press secretary for Robert F. Kennedy during his presidential run in 1968. Again, he's largely forgotten today, but he was a national figure when he made this announcement before the whole country that year, one day after the shooting at the Ambassador Hotel.
Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968. With Senator Kennedy, at the time of his death, were his wife Ethel, his sisters, Mrs. Stephen Smith, Mrs. Patricia Lawford, brother-in-law, Mr. Stephen Smith, and sister-in-law, Mrs. John F. Kennedy. He was 42 years old.
He was close friends with Robert Kennedy. He was truly broken up by that. Little digression here for a second. Right before that happened, Mick Jagger had just written the Rolling Stones song Sympathy for the Devil, and he had a line in there, "Who shot John Kennedy?" When he heard Mankiewicz say that, he changed the verse to this.
I shouted out, who killed the Kennedys? When after all, it was you and me.
Yeah, it went from John Kennedy to the Kennedys. Anyway, Frank Mankiewicz told a lot of stories about Robert Kennedy, and the one that I want to include tonight for historical purposes is the story of Robert Kennedy's greatest speech. 2 months before he was killed, he was supposed to give a speech in Indianapolis, and right before he was scheduled to give the speech, he heard the news that Martin Luther King had been killed. I'll let Frank Mankiewicz tell the story from there.
We got to Indianapolis, and some of the people said, "Don't do it, don't go there." Others, but it didn't matter. He was determined to go and give that speech. And meanwhile, I'm scribbling away, and he said, "Finish it up in the bus, bus with the press, and give it to me before I go on." So I said, "Fine." So I'm riding in the bus, but you see, the Indianapolis police, which was all the escort we had from the motorcade, they peeled off when we crossed whatever street it was in Indianapolis that marked the boundary of what I guess we call the ghetto then, as he started to go in to give that speech. And so the motorcade broke up. By the time the press bus got to where he was already up on the flatbed speaking. So I never gave him what might have very well have been the greatest speech ever. He was all off the cuff. Everything he said was just out of his own head. I don't think we could reproduce that now.
Was there, when we look back on that, there's a sense that this could have been very dangerous. The crowds might have reacted very emotionally.
Yeah, but they sure didn't. The speech, as most of you, well, you may know, I hope you know, if you get a chance, read it, or better yet, listen to it. There's some recordings now of that speech and a speech the next day about violence. And Indianapolis was quiet that night, probably because of that speech.
Here's Robert Kennedy's speech that night that superseded the one that Frank Mankiewicz wrote for him.
They know about Martin Luther King. I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks, and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land with an effort to understand, compassion, and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. A favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. And he once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
Well, Frank Mankiewicz was right about that. That was one of the great speeches of the 20th century, and it doesn't get enough publicity today. I don't know if the kids hear that one in school, but they should. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. I'm going to close with two songwriters tonight. The first was a one-hit wonder. It was Paul Kraft, who died at the age of 76, just 2 weeks after he was inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. He was a Mensa member, but that didn't prevent him from writing funny country music songs. He wrote a lot of them, but he wrote one that's a classic. It was recorded by Bobby Bare, and it's called Dropkick Me, Jesus, Through the Goalposts of Life.
Make me, Lord, more than I am. Make me a piece in your master game plan. Free from the earthly tempestuon below. I've got the will, Lord, if you got the toe. Dropkick me, Jesus, through the goalposts of life. End over end, neither left nor to right. Straight through the heart of them righteous uprights. Dropkick me, Jesus, through the goalposts of life.
How can you not love a country Christian football waltz? Both Bobby Bare and Paul Kraft were funny guys. Our second songwriter artist is John Holt, who died recently at the age of 67. He was from Kingston, Jamaica. He was one of the first popular reggae singers to come out of Jamaica, and he was one of the founders of the group the Paragons, and they were probably the most successful reggae group of the late 1960s and early 70s. They had a number of hits in England. They never made it big in the United States. But one of the songs John Holt wrote did make it big in the United States and in England and in the rest of the world. It was a #1 both in the United States and the UK in 1980 for Debby, Harry and Blondie. The Tide is High, one of the top songs of the 1980s.
The tide is high, but I'm holding on. I'm gonna be your number one. I'm not the kind of girl who gives up just like that. Oh no.
Here's the original 1967 version by the Paragons, led by John Holt, who wrote it.
The tide is high, but I'm holding on. I'm gonna be your number one. I'm not the kind of man who gives up just like that.